Hello and welcome to today's Astranti bite-sized video. Now today we're going to be talking a bit about power and, well, as you can probably guess from the context, we're not talking about electricity or force, we're talking about the power someone can hold within an organisation. And we're going to be talking about power in terms of Joe's doll factory. Now, at Joe's doll factory there are, let's say, 4 employees that we're going to be talking about. We've got Joe at the top of the organisation, we've got Bob, one of the production managers, and then we've got 2 of Bob's subordinates, Keith and Christine. Now one day, Bob's assistant, Keith, emails Bob and asks for a meeting to discuss a piece of work that Keith says is vitally important to the organisation. Really, it needs to be dealt with. Well, Bob replies that he's just too busy to meet with him, he'll do it another day. Later that day, Christine asks for a word with Bob on an important matter, similar to Keith, and Bob, despite still being busy, agrees to meet with her. And then, later still, when Bob is still incredibly busy, even worse perhaps, Joe asks Bob, can we meet up? He emails and says, I want to meet up, and Bob says, what time is good for you? Doesn't even consider refusing, says, what time is good for you? Now, why was Bob's response different when he was dealing with Keith to when he was dealing with Joe or even Christine? Well, they all asked for the same thing, to meet, to discuss an important matter that's important to the organisation, and Bob's workload hadn't changed in the time between receiving these different requests, so why was the response different? The key variable here is that the person changed between these emails. Keith is a lower level than Bob, so Bob felt he could say no. I mean, what could Keith really do to him? Well, nothing really, so Bob was free to say, no, I'm too busy, I've got other things I need to get done before I meet with you. Joe, on the other hand, is senior to Bob, in fact it's his doll factory, and so this time it was Bob who felt he couldn't say no because, well, Joe's power over him, or the power that Bob perceived Joe to have over him. But then we come to Christine, who was also at a lower level to Bob, like Keith, and yet Bob responded to her saying, yes, we can meet. So Christine exerted influence through her personality and the respect Bob knows she commands. Christine also has power, like Joe, but the basis of that power, the source of the power that she has, is quite different. It's based on her charisma and her strong personality, rather than, say, the levels of the organisation that they have. So we come to the sort of definition of power in terms of an organisation. Power is the ability to exert influence. Now, this could be due to the position of the individual in the organisation, as with, say, Joe using his authority as, a higher level in the organisation. But this power can also be based on other factors, such as the ability to influence the individual's rewards. Say, if you're a higher level in the organisation, say if Joe were responsible for deciding what Bob gets at the end of the year, his bonuses or his promotions or his pay rises. Well, I mean, if that's the case, then Bob's probably not going to want to hold off on meeting with Joe. He probably wants to keep him happy so that when it comes time to review his pay, he's going to get a favourable review. But this can also come from other bases, like their expertise. I mean, if Bob perceived Joe to have a much greater expertise in the field of doll creation, then he's going to listen to him a bit more closely because he feels he has something to say, something to tell him. And there's also the individual's ability to influence or exert punishment. For instance, at a high level of the organisation, Joe could possibly punish Bob for not meeting with him, saying, actually, you're being insubordinate. Well, I mean, if that's the case, Bob has no choice, really, but to do what he's told and to show up to a meeting, or even be eager to show up to the meeting. And finally, of course, there's charisma, if they just believe in the person. If Bob feels inspired by Joe, he feels that actually it'd be in his benefit to go and meet with Joe. All of these could be forms of power or sources of power. But let's look at a more theoretical underpinning. Let's look at French and Raven's 5 bases of power. Now, as it sounds, there are 5 bases, and let's look at each of them in turn. So we've got legitimate power, referent power, expert power, reward power, and coercive power. And let's start off with legitimate power. Now, legitimate power derives from an individual's role, their position, or their title. So Bob obeys his boss, Joe, because of Joe's position. He is the boss. He might even have a title like managing director or chief executive officer or some other. This is comparable to, say, like when a subject obeys their king, and it's not because the king is the greatest warrior necessarily, and frankly you look at a lot of royals and you can't imagine them on the battlefield anymore. it's just because they have the title. Next is referent power. Now this comes from personal charisma and a strong, motivating personality, and is often commonly seen in political and military figures who can inspire people with just the power of who they are. I mean, you can look through history and find any number of inspirational leaders, people that they say they were a great man or a great woman. I mean, examples being like Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela or Winston Churchill. I mean, everyone's heard the "we'll fight them on the beaches" speech. I mean, you couldn't say that's anything but charismatic, and it used referent power to inspire and to exhibit power over the entirety of Britain, really. And in our example of Joe's doll factory, referent power would be exemplified by Christine, which would be her source of influence. It was her natural charisma that meant her colleagues, including Bob, who's actually her superior, would support and guide her and respond favourably to her request for his precious, precious time, which he denied to Keith, who didn't have this referent power, this personal charisma. Next is expert power. And this is based in the ability to influence others through superior knowledge or expertise. I mean, as the name suggests, it is being an expert in using that to gain power over others. So a patient does as they're told by their doctor, because the doctor presumably has gone through medical school. They are an expert in medicine or surgery or whatever specialist field they're in. So the patient trusts that the doctor is an expert, and so that gives them power. Next is reward power. And that's the ability to influence pay and promotions and other benefits that give individuals the power to exert influence. So Bob has to do what Joe asks, for instance, because he knows that Joe controls his bonuses and frankly his pay and everything like that. And so if Bob ignored Joe's request or demand, order perhaps, for a meeting, then it could end up that Bob doesn't get a year-end bonus, or maybe he doesn't get that nice pay rise he was looking to get. And so that gives Joe power over Bob, because he has to do what Joe says in order to get his bonus. And the last one is coercive power. Now, this is sort of the opposite of reward power. This is where instead of the person with power being able to reward someone, they have the ability to punish someone. They can threaten someone, effectively. Now, we're not talking necessarily about physical force, although one would hope not in a business setting. No, coercive power in this instance would be more like demotions or disciplinary action. So if Joe decided that Bob was being insubordinate by not meeting with him because, Joe is the one in charge and he said, "You will meet with me," and Bob said, "Actually, I don't fancy it," or "I've got other things I'd rather do," then Joe could actually say, "Well, I'm going to demote you," or even, you're fired, in an extreme case, of course. And, of course, this is just in a business setting. In other settings, you have got instances where physical force would be, or physical threat would be, a form of power. For instance, a police officer could be exerting power over criminals or over people around them because they have a physical power. They have the ability to fight and force a resolution to an issue according to what they want. And as you'll have seen, or as you'll have noticed, Joe seems to derive his power from a number of French and Raven sources. This means his power is high. He has a lot of power in the organisation, which, as most bosses in an organisation, they tend to have quite a lot of power, and probably it would cause quite a bit of disorder if he didn't have power. Whereas Christine's power primarily comes from one basis, referent power. So, although she does have some power and is able to influence, say, Bob to a degree, she doesn't have a lot of power, and it's certainly a lot lower than Joe's power. And then we have Keith, poor guy. Doesn't seem to have any power whatsoever, or certainly any of the bases we've covered so far, it hasn't been mentioned. So his overall power in the organisation would be quite low, and that's why when he has an important issue that he needs to bring to his manager's attention, it doesn't go anywhere, or at least not at his pace. He has to wait until Bob has a clearing in his schedule, or when he fancies it. And that is a start on power. Now, of course, there is a lot more to be said on this subject. I mean, not just in this chapter of our tuition video, which you can find on Astranti's website as part of the full course. And this video would be part of CIMA E2. So if you want to find more about power or influencing organizations, just head on over to E2. You can find more information in our study text or in these videos. Or if you like this video, then please do like it, and you can find many more on our YouTube channel if you just subscribe. Now, thank you for listening, and I hope it's been somewhat informative, and I hope you hear some more of our videos again soon. Thank you.